The winds of Glacius 9 howled like 1,000 tormented souls, sweeping across the ice plains with merciless ferocity. At -50 degrees Celsius, the very air seemed to crystallize with each exhaled breath. This wasn't just cold. It was death, clothed in a pristine white shroud, waiting patiently to claim the unprepared. Corporal Mira Hayes stood at rigid attention among the 50 interplanetary cadets assembled in the departure bay of the Galactic Academy transport vessel. Her human form appeared deceptively fragile next to the varied alien physiologies surrounding her. Gas-borne entities housed in reinforced containment suits, insectoids with chitinous exoskeletons, reptiloids with metallic scales that gleamed under the ship's harsh lighting, and avian beings whose magnificent feathered wings were currently folded tight against their bodies. "Attention, cadets!" The Academy commander's voice boomed through the bay, silencing the nervous murmurs. A holographic display materialized, showing the bleak, snow-covered landscape awaiting them below. "Your final survival examination begins in exactly 30 minutes. You will be deployed to the surface of Glacius 9 with nothing but your intellect and physical capabilities." Mira felt the weight of stares from several non-human cadets. She knew what they were thinking. Humans were considered technologically dependent, biologically inferior, and evolutionarily stagnant compared to many galactic species. What could a warm blood possibly contribute in extreme environments? The commander continued. "This is not a competition. This is survival, pure and simple. 72 hours on the surface. No weapons, no technology, no external assistance." His gaze swept across the assembly, pausing momentarily on Mira. "The Academy produces officers capable of leadership in any circumstance. Prove yourselves worthy." Mira checked her thermal undersuit, the only concession allowed for species without natural cold protection. It would provide approximately 6 hours of moderate warmth before its nanofibers deteriorated in the planet's unique atmospheric composition. After that, she would be on her own. The deployment doors hissed open, revealing the swirling maelstrom of white below. One by one, the cadets stepped forward, their expressions ranging from stoic confidence to poorly disguised terror. "Good luck, Earthling," hissed a reptiloid cadet as he passed Mira. "Try not to freeze before landing." Mira's jaw tightened, but she remained silent. She'd faced worse prejudice during her years at the Academy. When her turn came, she stepped to the edge without hesitation and leapt into the void. The impact of cold struck her with physical force, like plunging into an ice bath. Her descent module slowed her fall, but offered no protection against the temperature. By the time she landed with a soft crunch in the deep snow, her extremities were already beginning to numb despite the thermal suit. Around her, chaos erupted almost immediately. The alien cadets, many from warm homeworlds, were collapsing upon contact with the surface. Their technological implants, which most species had come to rely upon over generations, were failing in the extreme cold. Some beings writhed in apparent agony as their biological systems malfunctioned. Others simply stood immobile, their metallic components seized or crystallized. "Help!" A gas-borne cadet's containment suit was rapidly developing frost patterns, the transparent material becoming opaque as its temperature regulation failed. The gaseous entity inside swirled frantically. Nearby, an insectoid with delicate, translucent wings crumpled to the ground, its movements growing sluggish as the cold penetrated its exoskeleton. "Status report!" Mira shouted, her leadership training kicking in automatically. No one responded. The cadets who were still conscious seemed focused solely on their own survival, huddling against the cutting wind. Mira quickly assessed the situation. The Academy had clearly underestimated the planet's hostility. Or perhaps this was the true test. Not individual survival, but collective action under catastrophic conditions. Squinting through the snowstorm, she spotted a rocky outcropping about 500 meters to the east. It would provide minimal shelter, but it was a start. "Everyone who can move," she called out. "Head for those rocks," she pointed emphatically, then bent to help the fallen insectoid. Its chitin felt brittle under her gloved hands. "Stay with me, cadet. We're going to make it." Only 3 other cadets seemed capable of following her instructions. A hulking reptiloid, whose metallic scales had already developed a layer of frost. A feathered avian, whose wings were now ice-encrusted. And a bipedal gasborn whose containment suit was failing rapidly. "The others?" the reptiloid grunted, gesturing toward the immobile forms scattered across the landing zone. "We'll come back for them," Mira promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The thermal suit was already losing efficiency. She could feel the deadly cold beginning to penetrate. "First, we secure shelter." Together, the small group struggled through knee-deep snow toward the rocks. Each step became a battle against both the elements and their own failing bodies. The avian collapsed twice, and by the 3rd time, it took both Mira and the reptiloid to keep their feathered comrade moving. When they finally reached the outcropping, Mira's mind was already racing ahead. The rocks alone wouldn't be enough. They needed an enclosed space, insulation, and some source of warmth. "We need to build," she said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Her companions stared at her blankly. "Build what?" The gasborn's voice crackled through its failing communication system. "With what?" Mira looked around at the desolate landscape. "With this?" She stomped her foot on the packed snow. "And that?" She pointed to the ice formations clinging to the rocks. "We're going to build a shelter." The others exchanged skeptical glances, but no one offered a better suggestion. Mira had spent 3 years in Arctic rescue operations on Earth before joining the Academy. The techniques were primitive by galactic standards, but they had kept humans alive in extreme environments for thousands of years. "I need something to cut ice blocks," she muttered, scanning the area, finding nothing suitable. She removed one of her boot reinforcements, a flat, metallic piece that could serve as a makeshift ice saw. For the next hour, Mira demonstrated how to cut blocks from the compacted snow and ice, stacking them in a rough semicircle against the rock face. The reptiloid, though weakened, proved invaluable with his strength. The avian, once Mira showed him how to pack snow between the blocks to seal gaps, worked diligently despite obvious pain in his frozen wings. The gasborn cadet, whose containment was now critically compromised, could do little but watch from within the partial shelter of the growing snow wall. "Why don't you—" the gasborn began, its voice fading in and out as its systems fluctuated. "Use tech. Surely you have—" "No tech," Mira reminded them firmly. "This is how humans survived before we had molecular heaters and thermal barriers. This is how we'll survive now." As the shelter began to take shape, a crude dome of packed snow and ice blocks with the rock face as one wall, Mira knew it wouldn't be enough. They needed insulation, and they needed to retrieve the others. "I'm going back for more cadets," she announced, once the basic structure was secure enough to provide minimal protection from the wind. "Keep building. Make the entrance small, just big enough to crawl through. We need to conserve heat." "You'll die out there," the reptiloid stated flatly, his speech slowing as his metabolism dropped. Mira pulled her thermal suit's hood tighter. "Then I'll die trying." She trudged back through her own footprints, now rapidly filling with fresh snow. The visibility had worsened, but she could still make out dark shapes on the white landscape, the fallen cadets. The first one she reached was an aquatic species, its water-based biological systems literally frozen solid. There was nothing she could do. The next, a silicon-based entity, had shattered in the cold like glass. The sight made Mira's stomach lurch. The third was still alive, barely. Another insectoid. This one with a more robust exoskeleton, but clearly suffering from internal crystallization. Its multiple limbs twitched sporadically. "I've got you," Mira said, hoisting the surprisingly heavy cadet across her shoulders. "Stay with me." By the time she returned to the shelter, her thermal suit had deteriorated to the point of uselessness. The synthetic fibers hung in tatters, and the bitter cold bit deep into her flesh. Her face felt numb, and she knew frostbite was setting in. The shelter had improved in her absence. The reptiloid had ingeniously incorporated his own shed scales, apparently triggered by the cold stress, into the walls, providing additional reinforcement. "Inside," Mira gasped, ducking through the small entrance with her burden. She gently laid the insectoid on the snow floor. The interior was cramped and still bitterly cold, but the difference from the howling storm outside was immediately noticeable. The simple barrier of snow and ice blocks cut the wind completely, making the temperature marginally more survivable. "Not enough," the avian cadet chittered through a frozen beak. "Still too cold." Mira knew he was right. They needed insulation and a heat source. But first, they needed to save as many others as possible. Over the next 3 hours, Mira made 6 more trips into the blizzard. Each journey became more difficult as her body temperature dropped and exhaustion set in. Twice she lost her way, only finding the shelter again by following her own, increasingly faint tracks. By the 3rd trip, she was operating on pure determination, her mind growing foggy from hypothermia. She managed to bring back 5 more cadets, 2 additional gasborns, whose containment suits had completely failed, leaving them as barely cohesive clouds within the shelter. Another reptiloid whose metallic scales had served him better than most. A crystalline entity that had fractured but remained conscious. And a silicon-based cadet who had gone into a defensive hibernation mode. The others she found were beyond help. Inside the shelter, conditions were deteriorating. The body heat of the gathered cadets provided minimal warmth, but it wasn't enough. The insectoids' movements had slowed to near immobility, and even the reptiloids were showing signs of severe metabolic depression. Mira knew they wouldn't survive the night without additional measures. "We need to expand," she announced, her voice hoarse from the cold. "And we need insulation." "With what?" the first reptiloid demanded weakly. Mira closed her eyes, thinking of her survival training. The native fauna. There must be something. As if in answer to her thoughts, a low, rumbling growl emanated from somewhere in the storm. The cadets fell silent, listening. "Kodiark beast," whispered one of the gasborns, its voice barely audible. "Apex predator. Hunts by thermal sensing." Mira's mind raced. A predator meant danger. Yes, but also opportunity. "Does it have fur? Hide?" "Thick dermal layer," confirmed the reptiloid. "Designed for insulation?" "Then that's what we need," Mira decided, her eyes scanning the shelter for anything that could serve as a weapon. The gasborn fluctuated in alarm. "You can't hunt a Kodiark. They're 3 meters tall with claws that can shred metal." Mira picked up a sharp ice fragment. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "I'm not hunting it. I'm scavenging." She moved toward the entrance. "There might be carcasses, or I might find shed skin. Either way, we need that insulation." "I'll come," offered the stronger reptiloid, struggling to rise. Mira shook her head. "You'll freeze solid out there. Your biology isn't designed for this. Mine is, or at least, it's better adapted than yours." She pulled what remained of her thermal suit tighter. "Keep improving the shelter. I'll be back." She emerged into a world transformed. The blizzard had temporarily subsided, revealing a crystalline landscape bathed in the pale light of Glacius 9's 3 moons. The beauty was haunting and deadly. The growl came again. Closer this time. Mira dropped to a crouch, using the snowdrifts for cover. Her training had taught her that most predators, regardless of their planet of origin, followed similar patterns. They sought easy prey, used efficient hunting strategies, and had weaknesses that could be exploited. Moving carefully from drift to drift, she followed the sound. The cold was an enemy unto itself, seeping into her bones with paralyzing intensity. Her movements grew stiffer, her thoughts more sluggish. But she pressed on. Over a small rise, she spotted it. A massive, white-furred creature with 6 powerful limbs and a head dominated by thermal sensing organs, rather than conventional eyes. The Kodiark was feeding on something, another of its kind. Mira realized. An older specimen, perhaps, or one weakened by injury. The opportunity was perfect, but the risk immense. She would need to approach the feeding predator, scavenge what she could from the carcass, and retreat without becoming prey herself. Slowly, using the wind direction to her advantage, Mira circled around to approach from downwind. The Kodiark continued feeding, unaware of her presence. When she was within 20 meters, she paused, assessing. The creature had already opened the carcass, exposing areas of hide that might be detachable without disturbing the feeding predator. If she was quick and silent. Mira inched closer, ice blade clutched in her numbing hand. At 15 meters, she could feel the faint heat radiating from the massive beast, a tantalizing reminder of what warmth felt like. At 10 meters, the Kodiark suddenly lifted its head, its thermal organs pulsing. It had sensed her. Mira froze, controlling her breathing. Running would trigger the predator's chase instinct. Instead, she slowly lowered herself into the snow, minimizing her heat signature. The Kodiark growled, turning its massive head in her direction. For an agonizing moment, it seemed to stare directly at her hiding place. Then, perhaps deciding she wasn't worth abandoning its meal for, it returned to feeding. Mira waited 5 more minutes, then resumed her careful approach. When she reached the carcass, she began delicately cutting away sections of the thick hide from the side opposite the feeding predator. The Kodiark, focused on the nutrient-rich organs, paid no attention to her quiet work. She managed to harvest 3 large sections of hide, each nearly 2 meters square, before deciding not to push her luck further. Bundling her precious cargo, she began the painstaking retreat. The return journey to the shelter was a nightmare of exhaustion and cold. The hide pieces, while not excessively heavy, became increasingly burdensome as Mira's strength waned. Twice, she stumbled and fell, and the second time, she wasn't sure she could rise again. It was the thought of the cadets waiting in the inadequate shelter that finally forced her back to her feet. Their lives depended on her success. When she finally reached the shelter entrance, she was barely conscious. She pushed the hide pieces through before crawling in herself, collapsing immediately inside. "Mira!" The reptiloid's voice seemed to come from very far away. "She's hypothermic. We need to warm her." Through a haze, Mira was aware of being moved, of rough scales against her skin providing friction warmth. The reptiloids, with their higher body temperatures, were using their own bodies to raise hers. "The hide," she managed to whisper. "Use it. Inside walls." As she drifted in and out of consciousness, the other cadets followed her instructions, attaching the Kodiark hide to the interior walls of the shelter. The effect was immediate and significant. The thick, naturally insulating material trapped what little heat was being generated by their bodies. Hours passed before Mira regained full awareness. When she did, she found the shelter transformed. The hide lined nearly every surface, creating a dark, womb-like space that was noticeably warmer than before. The cadets had also expanded the structure, nearly doubling its size by adding more ice blocks in her absence. "You were right," the gas-born cadet acknowledged, its form more stable now in the improved conditions. "Primitive methods. Effective." Mira sat up gingerly, assessing her condition. Her extremities were painful. Frostbite had set in, but she still had function. More importantly, she could think clearly again. "We need to create 2 chambers," she said, looking around at the gathered cadets. 9 had survived so far, including herself. 1 main living area and 1 medical area for the most critical. The reptiloid nodded. The insectoids are struggling the most. Their systems aren't designed for cold recovery. And we need ventilation, Mira continued. A small opening at the top. Without it, we risk carbon dioxide poisoning. She looked at the avian cadet. Can you reach the ceiling to create a vent? Your wings. The avian extended one frost-damaged wing. Limited mobility, but I can try. Together, they continued improving their ice shelter, the reptiloids, with their strength and increasingly valuable shed scales, reinforced the walls. The gasborns, though physically limited, proved excellent at detecting structural weaknesses through air current changes. The insectoids, once slightly warmed, created intricate supportive webs at critical junctures, strengthening the entire structure. By what Mira estimated was the end of their first day on Glacius 9, they had created a remarkably effective shelter. The main chamber could comfortably hold all 9 survivors, while a smaller adjacent chamber served as a recovery area for the most severely affected cadets. The temperature inside had risen to just below freezing, still dangerously cold, but a vast improvement over the lethal conditions outside. More importantly, it was stable, allowing the various species to begin their recovery processes. We should name it, suggested one of the gasborns, its voice stronger now that its form had stabilized somewhat. The shelter. Shelter Alpha, Mira said with a small smile. First of its kind on Glacius 9. That night, as the others rested, Mira kept watch. The blizzard had returned, its howling a constant reminder of how precarious their situation remained. They had shelter and moderate insulation, but they still lacked a heat source, and they needed water and, eventually, food. She was contemplating these challenges when a different sound cut through the storm, a rhythmic scraping, like claws on ice. Mira tensed, listening intently. The sound grew closer, more deliberate. Something was circling their shelter. "Wake up," she whispered urgently to the reptiloid nearest her. "We have company." The reptiloid's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. "Kodiark?" Mira shook her head. Different movement pattern, more methodical. They quietly roused the others, warning them to remain silent. The scraping continued, now directly overhead. Loose snow sifted down from the ceiling vent as something heavy moved across the shelter's dome. "Frostmaw," breathed the avian, his feathers flattening in fear. "Ice predator. Hunts by sound and vibration." As if confirming his words, a low, keening wail penetrated the shelter walls, a sound designed to terrify prey into movement, revealing their location. "Nobody move," Mira ordered in the barest whisper. "It's hunting by vibration. Complete stillness." The cadets froze, even the gasborns stabilizing their normally fluctuating forms. For 10 agonizing minutes, they remained motionless as the predator circled, occasionally emitting its bone-chilling wail. Then, without warning, a massive clawed appendage punched through the ice ceiling, sending chunks of frozen debris raining down on the terrified cadets. The Frostmaw had found them. "Back!" Mira shouted, abandoning stealth for action. "Against the rock wall!" The cadets scrambled to obey as another claw broke through, widening the hole. In the moonlight streaming through the breach, Mira caught glimpses of a nightmarish creature, pale blue, segmented, with multiple hooked limbs and a circular, tooth-lined maw. "We need weapons!" the reptiloid bellowed, positioning himself protectively before the weaker cadets. Mira was already moving, grabbing a large ice shard from the broken ceiling. "Aim for the joints!" she called out, remembering her xenobiology training. Most multi-limbed predators have vulnerable articulation points. The Frostmaw let out another keening wail, then drove 4 limbs through the ceiling at once, collapsing half the shelter. Snow and ice crashed down, momentarily burying several cadets. In the chaos, Mira saw their one advantage, the narrow entrance they'd constructed. The predator was trying to break in from above, rather than attempting to squeeze through the small opening. "The entrance!" she shouted to the reptiloids. "Block it with ice. Trap it outside." Understanding dawned in their reptilian eyes, while Mira and the avian distracted the frostmaw by jabbing at its probing limbs. The reptiloids worked feverishly to pile ice blocks against the entrance, sealing their only escape route, but also preventing the predator from entering that way. The gasborns, surprisingly, proved most valuable in the crisis. Their amorphous forms allowed them to squeeze into the smallest spaces, retrieving cadets buried in the collapse and pulling them to safety against the rock wall. The battle continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. The frostmaw, growing frustrated at its inability to reach its prey, became more aggressive, tearing at the shelter with increasing ferocity. Mira, fighting to protect the huddled cadets, felt a momentary surge of despair. The shelter was failing. The temperature was plummeting as more of the structure collapsed. They were going to die here, torn apart by an alien predator, or frozen in the killing cold that rushed in through the broken ceiling. Then, her foot struck something solid beneath the snow debris, a fragment of the Kodiak beast's leg bone that had been attached to one of the hide sections. It was long, thick, and sharply broken at one end. An idea formed, desperate, dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "I need something flammable," she shouted, grabbing the bone. "Anything organic that will burn." The cadets looked at her in confusion, but the avian immediately understood. "My molted-down feathers," he offered, plucking several from his wings. "Oil-rich, will burn." "Perfect!" Mira quickly wrapped the feathers around one end of the bone, creating a crude torch. "Now we need friction fire." The reptiloids, seeing her plan, immediately began rubbing their metallic scales against the rock wall, creating sparks. After several attempts, one spark caught the oil-rich feathers, igniting them with a whoosh. The makeshift torch blazed to life, just as the frostmaw tore away another section of ceiling. Mira thrust the flaming bone toward the creature's sensory organs. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The frostmaw recoiled with a shriek, its limbs flailing away from the heat and light. Most predatory species on ice worlds were hypersensitive to heat. It represented both danger and potential food. This one was no exception. "It's retreating," called the gasborn. "Keep the flame high." Mira pressed the advantage, waving the torch at every limb that came near. The frostmaw, clearly confused and intimidated by this new threat, began a gradual withdrawal. "We need to repair the shelter immediately," Mira ordered, once the predator had retreated beyond immediate striking distance. "It might return." Working frantically in the torchlight, the cadets rebuilt the collapsed sections. The reptiloids shed scales, the avians remaining molted feathers, and even solidified secretions from the insectoids were incorporated into the walls and ceiling, strengthening the structure beyond its original design. By the time they finished, dawn was approaching, a faint lightening of the perpetual storm clouds that shrouded Glacius 9. The frostmaw had not returned, though occasionally they heard its keening wail in the distance. Exhausted but triumphant, Mira surveyed their reinforced shelter. Against all odds, they had survived the night, but 2 more days remained before extraction, and their situation was still precarious. "We need a proper heat source," she said, examining the now extinguished bone torch. "And we need water." The avian tilted his head. "The torch concept. Could we adapt it?" Mira nodded thoughtfully. "If we create a friction fire pit, yes, we could melt snow for water and generate sustainable heat." Under her guidance, they excavated a small pit in the center of the main chamber, lining it with flat stones scavenged from the rock wall. Using the reptiloid scales as striking surfaces against bone fragments, they created spark-generating tools. It took nearly an hour of concentrated effort, but eventually, they succeeded in igniting another small fire, feeding it carefully with precious feathers and small amounts of the Kodiak hide scraps. The fire was tiny but effective. It generated enough heat to slowly melt snow placed near it, providing vital hydration for the dehydrated cadets. More importantly, it raised the shelter's internal temperature to just above freezing, a critical threshold for the survival of several species present. An airlock would improve thermal efficiency, suggested one of the gasborns, its scientific training evident. Double barrier entry system. Mira agreed, and they set about creating a small antechamber at the entrance, a simple but effective addition that further reduced heat loss when cadets needed to exit for necessary functions. By the end of the second day, Shelter Alpha had evolved into a remarkably sophisticated structure. The main chamber, now warm enough to remove frost from the walls, housed all 9 survivors comfortably. The medical chamber had been repurposed as a storage area for additional ice blocks and hide sections, ready for repairs if needed. The small but consistent fire pit provided both heat and water, solving their 2 most immediate needs. Food remained a concern, but most species present could survive the full 72 hours without nutrition, though not comfortably. That night, as the storm outside intensified again, the cadets gathered around the fire pit. For the first time since landing, conversation flowed freely among them. "I never understood why the Academy insisted on these primitive survival tests," admitted the avian, his frost-damaged wings slowly beginning to heal in the warmer environment. "Technology has made such scenarios obsolete." "Has it?" Mira questioned gently. "Look at what happened when we landed. Every technological system failed within minutes." The reptiloid nodded, his metallic scales gleaming in the firelight. "The cold neutralized generations of biological engineering. We were reduced to our core adaptive capabilities. And human capabilities proved most adaptive," acknowledged one of the gasborns. "An unexpected outcome." Mira shook her head. "Not unexpected. Humans may lack your specialized adaptations and technological integration, but we're generalists. We've survived on Earth through ice ages, in deserts, jungles, mountains, and oceans. Adaptation is our specialization. The Academy teaches that technological progress is the measure of advancement," said the insectoid, its voice a soft clicking. "Perhaps there are other measures." As the conversation continued, Mira realized something significant was happening. These cadets, future officers who would command mixed-species crews throughout the galaxy, were experiencing a profound paradigm shift. They were seeing value in diversity of approach, rather than assuming technological sophistication equated to superiority. The third day dawned with unexpected calm. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a pristine landscape of undisturbed snow stretching to the horizon in all directions. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the absence of wind made conditions much more manageable. "We should attempt to signal potential rescuers," suggested the avian, peering through the newly created observation port, a small, transparent ice block set into the wall. Clear weather might not last. Mira considered this. "The Academy said 72 hours. They'll come when the time is up, not before." "Unless the test has already been satisfied," countered the reptiloid. "Survival was the objective. We've survived." "We should still prepare for the full duration," Mira decided. "But yes, a signal might be prudent." Using the last of the Kodiak hide, they created a large, dark banner that could be raised above the shelter on a pole made from lashed bone fragments. Against the white landscape, it would be highly visible from the air. As they were securing the banner, a distant humming sound caught their attention. Looking up, they spotted a small metallic object descending from the clouds, a drone, emblazoned with the Galactic Academy insignia. "Reconnaissance," breathed the gasborn. "They're checking for survivors." The drone circled their shelter once, scanning with visible sensor arrays, then hovered directly overhead. A mechanical voice emanated from it. "Survival examination status check. Identify surviving candidates." One by one, the cadets called out their Academy identification codes. When all 9 had been registered, the drone continued. "Acknowledged. 9 survivors confirmed at coordinates designated Shelter Alpha. Extraction in 3 hours. Maintain position. With that, the drone ascended rapidly, disappearing back into the clouds. 3 hours, repeated the insectoid, its compound eyes gleaming with relief. We made it. Mira smiled tiredly. Not yet. 3 hours is still plenty of time for something to go wrong on Glacius 9. They used the remaining time to further reinforce their shelter, not out of necessity now, but from a shared sense of pride in what they had accomplished. Each species contributed their unique capabilities to the final improvements. The reptiloid's strength and scales, the avian's design insights for the ventilation system, the gasborne's detection of structural weaknesses, and the insectoid's web reinforcements at stress points. When the extraction vessel finally appeared, a sleek Academy transport descending through parting clouds, Shelter Alpha stood as a testament to interspecies cooperation and primitive ingenuity. Its rough-hewn walls and hide-covered interior might have seemed crude by galactic standards, but it had achieved what advanced technology could not in these conditions: survival. As the cadets emerged from their shelter to board the transport, the Academy commander himself stood at the base of the landing ramp, his expression unreadable. 50 cadets deployed, he stated flatly. 9 survived. Explain. Mira stepped forward, standing at attention despite her exhaustion. Extreme conditions exceeded technological tolerances. Commander, we adapted using primitive survival techniques based on human Arctic traditions. Sir. The commander's eyes narrowed. A human-led solution to a technological failure. He seemed to be turning this over in his mind. Interesting. He gestured toward the shelter. This structure will be documented and analyzed. The techniques employed will be incorporated into the Academy survival curriculum. His gaze swept across the 9 survivors. You have demonstrated the value of diverse problem-solving approaches and interspecies cooperation. Well done. Aboard the transport. As Glacius 9 receded beneath them, the cadets received medical attention and proper nutrition. Mira sat quietly, watching the ice planet shrink to a small white orb. The reptiloid approached, seating himself beside her. The Academy will commend you for this, he said, his voice carrying new respect. You saved us all. Mira shook her head. We saved each other. Each species contributed something vital. But it was human instinct that showed the way, the avian added, joining them. Without your primitive skills, we would have perished within hours. Perhaps there's wisdom in remembering our origins, Mira suggested. No matter how advanced we become, we're still biological beings, shaped by our evolutionary histories. The gasborne cadet drifted closer. The Academy teaches us to transcend our biological limitations through technology. But you showed us how to embrace those limitations as strengths. Mira smiled. That's the paradox of advancement. Sometimes, moving forward requires remembering what's behind. As the transport accelerated toward the Academy, Mira cast one last glance at the diminishing ice world. Somewhere on that frozen surface stood Shelter Alpha, a crude dome of ice and animal hides that had preserved 9 lives through one of the harshest environments in the galaxy. In the great technological expanse of galactic civilization, it was a tiny monument to a simple truth, that the most sophisticated adaptive technology in the universe remained the will to survive, the creativity born of necessity, and the strength found in cooperation across differences. The Galactic Academy's records would later note that the survival examination on Glacius 9 resulted in an 82% casualty rate, the highest in Academy history. But it would also note that the 9 survivors, led by a human cadet with primitive survival knowledge, had formed the core of what would become the Academy's most celebrated officer class, renowned throughout the galaxy for their innovative problem-solving and exceptional leadership in crisis situations. And on Glacius 9, long after the ice had claimed Shelter Alpha, the legend of the human who built a home from ice and skins when advanced beings froze would be told among the planet's eventual colonists, a reminder that sometimes the oldest solutions prove most enduring. Corporal Mira Hayes would go on to become one of the Academy's most decorated officers, specializing in extreme environment operations and interspecies crisis management. Her training program, Primitive Solutions for Advanced Problems, became mandatory for all Academy cadets. But in that moment, as the transport carried them back to the warmth and technology of civilization, Mira simply closed her eyes and appreciated the most primitive comfort of all: survival.